Today, I want to talk about action steps. Goals are fantastic, but a goal is an endpoint, and it is hard to get to an endpoint if you don't have a clear set of actions to get you there. A lot of times for school assignments, figuring out the clear set of actions is in fact an action step you need to take, and it can be one of the harder ones. So I'm going to show you how I would break down and plan an action set for essentially 3 different goals. One of them is a larger scale goal, and then the other 2 are going to be shorter scale goals, depending on exactly what we're trying to accomplish. So let's start with the shorter scale goals, because it gives you an idea of what they're doing and why. So 2 major things college students have to do: write papers and take tests. And in my classes, in some cases, you gotta do both. So you better know how to do it. All right, so let's start with write a paper. I have a paper. It is gonna be due at some point, in which case I'm also going to include the due date that I think it's going to be due. Now, if this is a standard semester, then most likely the due date of your paper is somewhere between 10 and 12 weeks from when you are assigned it in some manner. Let's use the 10 weeks. So 10 weeks from now, whatever that ends up being, I now have a paper due. What am I going to do about that? All right. I can't just sit down and write a paper. That's just crazy nonsense. I mean, nowadays I probably could, and I can fake it like nobody's business, but you shouldn't just sit down and write a paper. You need to have a plan. So let's talk about every step that would actually go into writing a paper. Write a paper step number 1, topic. If you don't know what you're writing about, you don't know what you're writing about. That is not going to be useful. To figure out your topic, I actually would say that even breaks down into some sub-steps, because at least sub-step 1 is figure out what the assignment is. But either way, I would say the first thing you'll do with topic is honestly brainstorm. And brainstorm means write down freaking everything that sounds like an even sort of half-assed good idea. Deal with it later. Read the assignment. Consider everything you sort of know about the topic, and maybe have a book handy to flip through an index of, and come up with a list of things that you think you could do. Honestly, this shouldn't be a super long period of time that you spend, but let's give it 30 minutes as a very real possibility for the amount of time you might spend brainstorming. I would spend 30 minutes brainstorming. And you should force yourself to do the brainstorming part of that for like a good 10 to 15. Like set a timer and just keep writing stuff down, typing stuff in. Even if you know it's bad, you can delete it later, but do that. So now we'll go on to the next topic, which is topic whittle down. Now that you have brainstorming, now you got to figure out what actually sounds good. So once you have your brainstorm, go through the list. Cross off things that were clearly stupid ideas, cut it down to a few specific items, and start kind of glancing at them. Glance at it in the book, or maybe on the internet or something like that, and think about how you would deal with those topics. So give each one that you kind of whittle down a good 5 to 10 minutes to look at, think about, throw around. So for this one, maybe it depends on how good you are at picking. We're talking 30 to 45 minutes. Could even go to an hour if you're kind of very deliberative. I'm very decisive, so I tend to pick a topic very quickly. I might also recommend at this stage, and this should be really early on, so these items are going to be week 1. And when I say week 1, I mean the moment you find out something is assigned and you think you have a chance of being able to fake your way through a topic, do that. Some of your instructors will ask for a topic by a certain date. This should happen 2 weeks before that date, 2 weeks before that date. And if they don't ask for a topic by a specific date, week 1, do this, and at the end of week 1, email your instructor with your top topic and or your top 3 topics for some advice. That's how you do that. All right, at that point, you have a topic. What's up next? research, 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 research. Now, research is a completely different step than writing, and it is a completely different step than anything else. So this is where you read the assignment, figure out what type of information you need to know, and don't try to learn the information yet, just gather sources. This is where you read a little bit of something and say, oh, that's good. Let me link that for later, and give yourself a little line. I suggest making a whole document out of this, where you give yourself a link to something and a line, or maybe the book title and a line. If you can start taking things out of the library, maybe if there's stuff you know you're gonna be able to find online anyway, fine. If you find articles that you don't have access to, this is the time to get them through interlibrary loan, because who cares how many digital articles you have? You can dump them later. So this is the gathering sources portion. Now, I would advise doing this in at least 2 separate blocks, each of which can probably be a length of time. So this would be like a 2 times 45 to 60 kind of block. I get lost in research. Set a timer so you don't get lost, but also set a timer so you do the work. All right. So now that you've started to gather sources, at this point, you're also probably starting to get a sense of where you're heading. I suggest taking a moment to do an outline. Oh, we're probably on week 2 here. That's what you should do over week 2. You'll notice I'm keeping this to about 2 things a week, because you got other classes, man. You got stuff to do. So let's call this week 3. Week 3 of your paper is due now in 7 weeks. It's less than 2 months, people. Outline. And I mean outline, introduction. What's the next thing you're going to write about? What's the next thing you're going to write about? What's the next thing you're going to write about? What's the next thing you're going to write about? It doesn't need to be the thing, just the topic, the approximation. Maybe your instructor gave you a great outline to start with, in which case take it, put it in another document, retype it, make sure you understand it. But this is where you put the essentially items in order. That's what we're going to call it. I'm bad with words, biologist. Items in order, and this is probably a 30 to 45 minute single shot adventure of just creating outline. It might not be your final outline. Who cares? It's where you're starting, it's where you're going. All right, now we start to combine the outline and research processes. That's my favorite. When you combine the outline and research processes, you put the research in the outline. Now, this is where you actually have to start figuring out how your research matches up with your topics, which is important, but you had read some things, or at least some vague things. Now you're going to read in a little more detail, and you're going to get actual pieces of information like facts, data, something you definitely want to add. So under wherever you are in that outline, add a tidbit, a fragment, a piece, a study, something you're definitely going to reference, and put the link to that in the document now that you're going to work in. So your research document of sources probably should be separate from this, but it could be completely at the bottom of it, however you want to function. But you want to put the research into the outline, all right? This could be a 1-shot, it could be a 2-shot. I'm going to call it a 2-shot, and I'm going to give it the longer time, the 30 to 45 to 60 minutes per each one. So you have a little more time to read something, put it in, read something, put it in. And who knows, you might need a 3rd shot at this as well. And in fact, let's call this weeks 3 and 4 and give it all of that time just to make sure. All right, now we are on week 5, which means your paper is due in 5 weeks. Hey, maybe we should, start working on that or something. At this point, you've practically got it written. Come on. All right. Week 5? Right. But super fancy trick key, and you've probably heard this from me before, don't start at the beginning. I'm again starting at the beginning. Right? Segments. Segments that make the most sense to you, the area in which you're the most interested. You made an outline, just make paragraphs in those outlines, turn that information into stuff, make sure your sources are still kind of pinned into the right spots. At this point, you might shorten the sources and do some partial proper citing, at least, author year, and drop it at the end so you know where the link goes to. But write in segments. And a lot of times, so let's call this 5 to 6, that we're talking about, actually let's improve it. And it might be depending on how you do it. I tend to be a little bit more when I'm writing. I get into it for a little bit and I get tired. My brain doesn't like to focus for that long. So I prefer to write for 30 to 45 minute blocks more often. So you're gonna need a bunch of these blocks in your schedule. Eventually, you'll write the beginning and the ending. And let me be clear about all of this. Right, intro and ending. I'd say do those together in like one good 30-minute, by now you know everything you're talking about chunk. Let's be clear, none of this writing is supposed to be good. This is your first draft. None of this is supposed to be any good. You know it's not going to be good. Just get it on paper. Deal with it later. But if you get it on paper, then you'll be moving along. Now, I'm assuming that your instructor does not want to see a rough draft of this, but you should always ask if they're willing to look at one. Because if you have a rough draft, dude, by all means, send that rough draft to them. Week 7 should be a review week at this point. And I would say it depends on how you fall. You could review yourself. You could put a little bit of time in. And I'd say put a little bit of time in. Think a little bit. Give yourself a little space. And then do a review. Or you could have other people do a review. But you're just going through it for basic stuff. This is not spelling and grammar time. This is a content review. Do you have all the stuff? Is it in there? Does it kind of make sense? Can you get somebody else to read it and let you know if this stuff is in there and it kind of makes sense? Can you drop it to your instructor? Like I said, just because they don't put it on the thing doesn't mean they won't look at it. And this is probably a like 60-minute deal of you walked away from it for a little while, review. It's the only thing this week so that you walk away for a little while and review. But we're getting much closer to it being done. So week 8 clearly needs to be finish the stupid paper, as in revise. And this is, again, content revision. It can also be wording revisions where you start to make sure that you're saying the thing you think you're saying. So go back through, look at it. Yeah, at this point, you've got most of a paper written, scanned over, get somebody else to look at it, do what you can. This is a good time to start breaking it up. So don't necessarily feel like you need to revise like the whole thing all at once. In fact, I have a lot of trouble looking at my own words for very long. I've written something and I'm like, gone, no, it's done, I'm finished. So 2 to 3 times, 30 minutes is probably plenty. Week 9 is editing and revision now, as when you make darned sure that you've got all the stupid things where they're supposed to be. And if you're not good at this, dude, get somebody else to do it. We got writing tutors. Every place is writing tutors. And make that appointment. Actually, let's toss this back here. Make writing tutor appointment, which is a 5-minute thing, back in week 7 so that you remember to do it. So the editing and revision part is probably going to take some amount of time. Again, you probably want to do it in pieces. So this is for everything. So let's say same game, 2 to 3 times, like 30 minutes. And you're a whole week ahead of your paper right now. Isn't that fantastic? Which means if something got screwy somewhere in the middle here, which it does, let's be real, it does, you're good. And also each week you'll notice you only put in a couple hours. Now you do have to put those in your schedule, those couple hours each week to cover it, but do make sure you did that. You do a quick addition and sort of get a sense of how much work is going to go into this paper. Let's see, 30-ish, so I'll call that whole beginning an hour. But then I'll up the second one to 2 hours for research to write 3. And then 4.5, 5 for the outline and the research total. So 2 more hours for that. So we're at 5 hours before you even start writing a word, by the way. So we're gonna, let's call it 5 hours of prep. That's topic, research, and outline. Then the actual writing time, varies depending on who you are, but if I do 6 times 30, let's call it 7 times 30 just to make it work. That's 210 minutes. That's, let's see, 180 would be 3 hours. So 3.5 hours. So 3.5 to 4 hours of writing, which you should not do all in one night, please. And then you're gonna review and stuff for another like 2 hours of review and revision. And that is what you should put into writing a paper. All right, next one. What about if you were doing an exam? Studying for an exam. This one I find actually is even harder because it has a less clear system of like steps. So what's the best system of steps for studying for an exam? Well, how long away is our exam? I forgot to put how far away our exam is. Our exam is probably, in a college level course on a 15-week basis, you're probably taking 3 exams. Every exam is 5 weeks from the previous one. Isn't that fun? So your exam is 5 weeks away and we're starting at day 1. Day 1 is the moment you start learning material for an exam. No, for real. Here is where you have to start really figuring out what you need to do to get that material down. So, first of all, there is the essentially learn material phase. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. I mean, some of it might be that you're taking notes in a lecture. I'm not going to count that specifically, but I'll get to the lecture notes in a bit. Learn materials reading. You're going to be doing that consistently. So now this is more of an every week kind of game. So these are probably more like 3x of 45 minutes every week, because every week you've got to be reading. And by the way, go back to my other reading videos or forward to them at some point. Reading is not a passive process. You should be writing while you read. So this is key. Learn materials, remembering or recall, my most important thing. And you might do this in different ways. One of these ways would be to create flashcards. One of them would be to create quizzes. One of them would be to write your notes in a manner so that you have to think about the things as it's going. But this is essentially not just remembering, but prep for remembering. So let's call it prep for recall, which is the creation of the thing that's going to help you remember. Flashcards, I'm a fan. But also like a half blank outline, like it includes the word and then you have the definition somewhere else that you can check it later. Whatever you have to do to create that. Prep for recall is an important part. And honestly, you should be doing it with every reading assignment. If you do it with every reading assignment, it actually wouldn't take that long. You could do it 3 times 30 minutes right after you read every week. Recall materials is the next step, which is where you use the recall materials you made. Oh, and you want to make some of those from your lecture outlines too. So make flashcards or make an open outline, make something. When you're doing recall, do not read anything. It has to come from your brain. You can read this first part of something and then it has to come from your brain. You can look at a flashcard, it has to come from your brain. Recall materials is another key thing. I suggest doing the recall materials on the opposite days than what you're doing the other ones. And if you do that, you again could do this for not too much time. So like 3 by 30 minutes every week, just do it on the alternate days. So on lecture days, maybe you lecture and do your reading, then you would do that. If you want to read on your off lecture days, then you would read on those days and you do recall on your lecture days. Something that got it moving. But these are every week items. Now they're not much every week, but they're every week items. And that's sort of what's key, is that you're putting between 30 minutes and an hour of this class almost every day of the week. Take 1 day off. 6 things here, 3 times a week, alternating is 6 days, take a day off. But other than that, this is the way you should go. Now, This is how you should be doing it for probably the first 3 weeks of learning. When you get 2 weeks out from the exam, you need to step up your game a little bit. And so now you have to start changing your methodology. I recommend practice tests 2 times per week, something like, you know, and they don't have to be long, 30 to 45 minutes. So if you have that capability to get those, do them. If you don't, an alternate option is create a practice test and swap with a classmate. So if you spend 30, 45 minutes creating the test and 30, 45 minutes taking the other one, you have done the same amount of work, and honestly, you've probably done it better in doing that. Plan to meet with a study group. At this point, it's a good time to practice and then start quizzing each other. So quiz each other on questions, double check your stuff. If you're not around other people or you can't find ways to communicate with other people, hey, that's where those flashcards come in. Do it. Get the people in your household to run flashcards for you or to help you out. They'll learn too while you're at it. It's super exciting. So this one's a little bit more complicated because of the way you have to do it, but these are still actions with times that go in a calendar. And that's really the key to all of this, is that you want to be able to put these things somewhere in your calendar. So if you know that you have a class where you have an exam every 5 weeks, that class should have in your calendar reading time, like 45 minutes 3 days a week, maybe an hour 3 days a week. It should have prep time where you take that material and you turn it into something, and it should have recall time where you literally quiz yourself. If you put a 30-minute block in your calendar, even if you have 2 15s and you're recalling, that's fine. But put it there and be like, I'm gonna do it at this time, and that's the way it's going to be. You find yourself constantly busy doing stuff, maybe take one of the little times in those prep for recall, make yourself an audio set of flashcards where you say a term, then you give yourself space, and then you say the definition. Put that on while like you're cooking dinner, and then try to keep saying the thing before it says it. Try to get it in faster. That's a possibility. So there's a lot of different things you can do for this, but the important thing is to put these items on your calendar. All right, those are the 2 shorter term easy things. How do you do this with like a whole class, especially one that has a lot of assignments? Well, essentially you do it exactly the same way, but you do it with the assignments in mind. So for my biology class, for instance, may or may not, you know, do it this way. I have a series of things you have to do every week. You have to read. You have to write definitions. You have to take an online quiz. If you're taking it online, you have to go to a discussion board. You have to take an online assignment. There might be 2 of those. There might be 3, it depends. So let's just call those assignments, 2 to 3. You have to reply to a discussion board. And then eventually you do actually have to take an exam. Whew! But it's well defined, so we can give each one, again, a thing to do. You can tell how long reading is going to be. You can get a sense of that. And you can set in your calendar 2 times read, 45 minutes. You can do your definitions while you're reading if you keep them nearby, or you can read and do them separately. But that's probably 2 times 30 minutes at minimum to get those done. Again, these are just things that go in your calendar. Now, I always recommend you take the online quiz immediately after writing the definitions because they're related. So if you're doing that in my class, when you do the definitions, you might only do a 1 by 30 for the online quiz, but let's make it a 1 by 45 because what you're going to want to do is take the quiz once, look at the ones you got wrong, look up the ones you got wrong in your definitions and double check them, and then try it again. If you still don't like your score, you might then, I would then say wait, or compose an email to your instructor asking them about it. Make sure you get it. So you might want to take them a couple times. So I always say that about the sort of online quizzes. Usually a post on a discussion board is not that long. It'll be like a 1x30 each week, but each week you should literally have post on the discussion board. Here, this is on my calendar right there. Same thing with assignments. There's 2 to 3 of them. These are a little bit more complex. They ask you to get a little bit more involved. They also do the thing where it tells you what you got right or wrong and you want to go back and look it up. So on an assignment, I would say go through it and try to answer it one time through, and that might take 30 minutes. And then go through it and mark which ones you got wrong and note them for next time. And that may take 45 minutes. And then you might want to go back to that assignment and double check it and try it again. So each assignment might be 2 times 45 times 2 or 3 of them, depending on what you're doing, is probably something like 5 times 45 minutes. So possibly every day, or maybe if you prefer to work in blocks a little bit bigger than that, you'll go back to a discussion board. That'll take you probably 30 minutes to reply. For the exam, the cool thing about my class, if you've done all this stuff, you've practically already studied. But you might want to give yourself a 60-minute prep. And then also you want to give yourself 60 minutes to take it. Well, technically it's 50 minutes to take mine. These are approximately every 2 weeks-ish, but they can come a little bit faster. So what you would do is you'd look at the due dates for them and literally put them in your calendar this way, starting with the exam. Here's where the exam falls. Let's back up and place these other things in the calendar. If you're in my 8-week class, this falls dead on 8 weeks. So you can literally put this on a week schedule. If you're in the 14-week class, it's a little bit more complicated. It's like 2 in a row and then a little bit of time before the exam, then 2 in a row like that. But I have those dates prepared. And I also have suggested due dates for all of my stuff anyway, so you can literally put all these on a calendar. That's what you want to do. You want to take your class and figure out everything you have to complete, how long it's going to take, and where can you block it in. So if you did your time budget, now you've done this, now you know how to put your action steps into place. And make sure your action step is something you know what to do. It is read this. It is write these. It is take this assignment. If it is studying for an exam, it is either making flashcards for, reviewing flashcards for, making a practice test, taking a practice test, going to a particular section and outlining it. It has to be something specific. Be as action-oriented as possible or you won't know what you're doing, and put those actions in your calendar, or at least in your, this is my exam block period, here's my list of things I'm doing for it time period. All right, I hope that's helpful.